Hello, I'm Julia from Brand Medicine International. And just over a week ago, I held an interactive webinar on the questions that Australians were asking about the coronavirus vaccine rollout. And it was really well received, and there's been a lot of interest in the results that were discovered, that when we compare and contrast them to the kinds of questions that people ask publicly, it's very interesting to see what comes up, such as, are vaccine passports legal? Or are vaccine manufacturers liable for damages? And another very typically Australian question is, can you drink with insert brand of vaccine here? So what I wanted to do, since the vaccine rollout has actually started now, and there's been some very interesting developments over the last week with respect to, some unfortunate events in terms of overdosing, the use of healthcare professionals who were not fully trained in understanding the multi-dose vials and things like that. So there's been a lot of response to that in terms of the kind of questions that Australians are turning to search engines to seek answers about. And so what I wanted to do in this quick session is just to have a look at the questions that have changed over that time, and then also examine the search results. And let's all have a think about what we could do maybe collectively with the public health messaging and with turning up in response to the real world questions that people are asking, to make sure that we do our bit to prevent vaccine hesitancy and, in the worst case, vaccine resistance. So I'm just going to share with you my screen here. These are the different questions that have come up, and I'm going to zone in on a few of them because the rate of questions that change in terms of Google searches generally is 10 to 15% different search queries every single day, i.e. questions that have never been seen before. So that's where we can kind of compare what happened last time. And vaccine bungle is something that has come up as a search term that people are looking up in response to what's happened. And so I'm going to have a bit of an examination of that. The other one is vaccine diplomacy, that came up as well. Vaccine eligibility checker, as people are naturally trying to examine if they're going to be qualified for getting the vaccine themselves, which is great because it reflects there's a lot of eagerness out there to adopt the vaccine. I'm certainly one of those people. And, vaccine injuries and vaccine issues are some other questions that people are asking. So if we go here and we follow through what Australians are getting in terms of their search results when they look up vaccine bungle, what is coming up here is news. ABC, 9, Perth News, Sydney Morning Herald, The Australian. Following that down, the Australian Financial Review, is that Queensland Times, 7 News, and the Belgian Courier. So what this shows to me is that in response to the real world question and the average language that Australians are using when they turn to their search engines, only news results are coming up here. Now we have a variety of news platforms in Australia that range from, seriously balanced, evidence-based investigative journalism through to, propaganda, clickbait, shrill people who are just really seeking clicks and, driving advertising revenue as their highest priority. So if Australians are turning to search engines and being directed to news articles in response to a very common question around the vaccine rollout, I feel that, the public health messaging has really been put at risk because this is a missed opportunity to turn up in response to these queries and make sure that we're present and we are addressing these concerns in a balanced way to reassure people rather than letting them be fed on this fear through following through a different news article that we're sort of leaving to chance. In terms of the vaccine eligibility checker query, this one is being directed to healthdirect.gov.au as the top search result. So that's a really great landing page. And obviously a lot of thought has gone into that being a question that people are asking, and there's an absolute correlation between what people are looking for and the name of what they're going to come across here. And these are all sponsored government websites that are coming up in response to this. Tasmania, Mount Druitt Medical Centre, so actually, healthcare professional sites as well, which is really great. So when people are asking about vaccine diplomacy, this is another situation where the search results are directing them to news as a primary landing page. We've got Bloomberg, The Guardian, NBC, The Conversation. I guess in a way, there's less of a risk when people are searching for this query for them to be directed to news sites, because that's not necessarily going to influence the vaccine rollout here in Australia. It's not going to drive or encourage vaccine hesitancy or vaccine resistance. So let's have a look at another common question that has come up that's new since I first undertook the first webinar on this. So vaccine injury is another query that people are asking about. I guess in response to the overdose, they're like, well, if that happens to me, am I going to be protected? Now, what's really interesting here is that people are driven to a historical site that shows lots of different cases around vaccine injury compensation programs. Then they're seeing the RACGP, where they've got our GP network vocally advocating for the fact that Australia needs a vaccine injury compensation program. So as a reader who searched this, people are going to see that, oh, hang on a second, so we don't have one. So if something happens to me, I'm not covered. And the other thing is that why are our doctors saying that, we don't have this and we're abrogating our responsibility through not having it? So it's an interesting kind of landing page for people to be directed to based on a very common query that has been asked in search engines right now today in Australia. People are also being directed to the New England Medical Journal, the Journal of Medicine. So, this is going to be probably a pretty heavy duty article. So unless you've got really high health literacy, it's not going to be something you're going to be easily able to decipher and relate to. And then you've got a government website here, but it's just talking about shoulder related to Bing and Wikipedia. So Wikipedia does turn up a lot as well. And particularly in Bing, often if there's no advertising in the page, then that Wikipedia will own this white space on this side. With Google, what I would like to just put out there for consideration is that this white space is available. So if we're reading the real world questions that Australians are asking about the vaccine rollout, then we can design a response to turn up here in terms of using Google Ads and directing them to evidence-based content, or in a perfect world, even developing like a chat bot that can be programmed to have answers to commonly asked questions, and we can constantly update that. And then as people are asking these questions, you can just have, I'm the COVID conversation person, and you have this here to answer those questions and for that engagement. And hopefully the novelty of that will draw people away from the clickbait news articles and give them a balanced message that, as healthcare professionals, we know they need to have in order to adopt the vaccine rollout. I am going to just share this article that was in today's or a recent Sydney Morning Herald. And, this is a great example of what can happen if the public messaging is not well managed. Certainly, it's extremely volatile right now. And what they're seeing in the UK is that they feel that, this vaccine resistance that's leaving lots and lots of doses of the vaccine go to waste, that is a big problem. And they're talking about logistic failures, and we've had that here as well, where we've seen a whole box of the Pfizer vaccine be discarded. And again, that's another great example of where good messaging can counteract people saying, oh, that it was a waste and things like that. Well, it's actually, that was the responsible thing to do, and it should actually engender more confidence in our vaccine rollout, that we are having that due diligence to be careful with the doses and making sure that they're stored at the right temperature, rather than having it blow up as a negative news story. But in this case, we can actually see from overseas experience that when the doubts are sown, and then when you've got leaders, officials, and journalists sprouting a series of ignorant statements about the vaccine's efficacy, and waging war against its manufacturer, what ends up happening is that this noise drives vaccine resistance and will diminish the public health response in terms of gaining that critical level of vaccination that we need for herd immunity. So, so this is certainly a really big issue that we need to address. And we have that opportunity here in Australia if we're listening to the real world questions that people are asking, and we're responding to them in real time with balanced articles. Because as you can see here, you can't always just leave it to news articles. And I'm actually just going to toggle back to another thing here that I saw today on Twitter. So there was an article, again, I believe this was in the Sydney Morning Herald, where they're talking about that people could get a fine of $880,000 or 5 years in jail if they talk about what vaccine they're going to be giving from their practice. And so, you know, the headline here is again another clickbait. And I actually am going to have to double check the source of this. It could be a different paper, but she's just taken a screenshot of this. And here we are having a headline that says why the public will not know which jab they're offered. And the way that that's written, and the shrill kind of alarmist headline there, it makes people think that we're covering something up, when in fact this article is just reflecting the responsible messaging around prescription products that we have in place in Australia with respect to our Medicines Australia Code. But unfortunately, it's not coming across this way in the news. And so I anticipate that this is going to, you know, drive a lot more vaccine hesitancy. This lady has over 1,500 followers on Twitter. And here she is saying that, you know, the doctors are going to be put in jail if they tell the public which vaccine they receive. She can't spell it, or she's doing that on purpose. But of course, they will tell you when you're in the practice, but they're not allowed to promote which vaccine that they're giving. And that's a very distinct difference. But when it's been publicized, it's not coming across that way. So, so just in summary, I just wanted to illustrate a little bit of the changes that are happening online with regards to the questions that people are asking as the dynamics in the real world continue to evolve and change over the coronavirus vaccine rollout, and also illustrate the kind of search results that are currently being served up to people in response to those queries. If there's nothing from a public health point of view that's matching the real world language that Australians use, like bungle, for example, or jab. So it's just something for thought to think, well, okay, if this has gone so badly in the UK, where we've left our chances for vaccine adoption to let people, you know, continue to go to news as their primary source of information, then maybe we have an opportunity here to reconsider our approach to that and turn up online in response to those real world questions. So I'll just leave that with you. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. And if you did want to ask me anything more specific about search listening and how to apply it either in this context or for your brand in your category, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.